Frank Velásquez Jr. is a storyteller extraordinaire, social justice warrior, and community connector. With a heart as big as his vision, Frank dances on the front lines of change, armed with an unshakable belief in racial and gender equity. Whether he's dropping knowledge on the conference stage or storytelling behind the scenes, Frank's passion for social justice is as infectious as his smile, and he creatively connects our stories, preserving the unique flavor of each one like a delicious bowl of gumbo. His professional journey has included stops in the private sector, such as Walt Disney World and MGM Grand Resort and Casino, Las Vegas, as well as higher education, Pima Community College, the nonprofit sector, CEO of JobPath, consulting, contracting at the YWCA of Southern Arizona, Sunnyside Foundation, and Soul Casinos, just to name a few. Additionally, Frank brings local, regional, and national attention to the inequities that communities of color face through his speaking engagements and conference presentations in Southern Arizona and throughout the United States. As founder of For the Hood and the mastermind behind the Ascending Leaders in Color leadership program, he's forging paths for peeps of color to lead with authenticity, courage, and joy. Because for Frank, advancing equity isn't just a job, it's a movement towards building generational wealth for communities of color to thrive.
Yay.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Frank.
Who's that? Thank you. And is it the so?
Yeah, this one here, and then I can keep it if you want.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't think I need this, so I'm going to put this down. What I'm going to do is I'm probably going to be in this space. So let me ask you, can you hear me clearly if I'm here? Can you hear me pretty clearly if I'm here? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Nisa, Jeanette, Anita, for inviting me. This is really exciting. I see some familiar faces and I see some new faces, so I'm excited to be here. But before I start, well, first of all, how y'all doing? Good. Is it too early? How y'all doing? Okay, that's a little better, so I'll give you grace. It's a Friday morning and you're here with me, so I thank you for that. All right, so before I do any session, I always like to kind of do a framing. So this is Frank's framing. My first thing, and we'll start in the bottom left, nervous energy will subside. Every time I do a presentation, the first 5 minutes is just like, I can feel myself talking fast, and so but I promise after about 5 minutes, I'll start settling in. So y'all okay with that? Yeah. I need some whoop whoops. Okay. All right, second thing is I use notes. It's the first time using it off my phone, though. But I use notes because I don't like to stand behind the podium, and I want to make sure that I'm in space with you. So because I'm not behind the podium, I have my notes. Are y'all okay with that? Whoop, whoop. Okay. All right, let's go to the top corner, top right. So I can already feel that energy. All right, so I have a commitment to being authentic. Obviously, you're going to hear about my story in a bit, and I just want to make sure, or I've been in spaces, as you heard through the bio that Anita read, I've been in a lot of spaces that are not my spaces. So when I'm here as a representative of my business, my space, I do have a commitment to being authentic in this space. So y'all okay with that? Whoop, whoop. All right, and the last one is commitment to being respectful. When I'm in my authentic space, I get to be me. And so I promise you that whatever I say, it's said with love and care. And so that's my commitment to you to being respectful. Sometimes I might say something that maybe you haven't heard before, but I want to make sure that at least I'm sharing with you that is my commitment, that I will always be respectful. So again, are you okay with that? Woo, woo. All right, let's get going. All right, so I'm going to start with my first reflection. I'm going to have like five reflection points. So let's start. Oops, where'd you go? It's already messing up. Oh, there you are. Okay. So I want to start, and if you've noticed my sneakers, so they're nice and bright. There's actually a story about them, and I didn't know about these sneakers until after I purchased them. So I want to start in a place of each of my grandmothers who've passed. So I'll start with my dad's mom. So my dad's mom I think she lost her husband when my dad was 11. I don't remember her age, but she was in her 30s, and had to move from Miami, Arizona to Nogales and kind of like restart her family. I think she had 3 kids at the time, and then she ended up having 2 more with her new husband. Their home life, I would say, would be one of acculturation. If you're not familiar with that term, acculturation was they retained everything of who they were in the space of who they were as a family. My mother's mother was a single mom of 5 children. She was the hardest worker that I know, didn't pick up the English language, but she told each of her 5 kids that if you want to succeed in America, you got to speak English. You got to assimilate. You got to fit in. So those are the 2 stories of each of my grandmothers of how they raised their kids. And so when my mom and my dad met, we were assimilated. So my mom took those learnings from her mother and put them to my older sister, myself, and my younger brother, where we were assimilated. So English is my first language. We didn't grow up a lot with the culture. We would go to my dad's mother's often, but it was a very different set of circumstances. And it's not, and just so you all know, it's not that I'm not the only person in Tucson who was raised, who's my age, was raised that way. If you look at central Tucson, most of those who are of Mexican-American descent, which is what I am, were raised that way. So there's a number of us in this community where English is our first language. It messes with your head. So I'm gonna tell you, so this was really, I didn't know where I fit. So this is actually a picture of the Arizona border. If you've heard the phrase, or if you haven't heard the phrase, ni de aquí, ni de allá, it means I'm not from here and I'm not from there. And that's how I felt growing up. I didn't know where I fit. So I absolutely had friends, and certainly if I'm in certain situations, but internally, especially when I went to my dad's mother's place, I never felt like I belonged. I just didn't feel like I belonged because I couldn't communicate with her. And even though I couldn't communicate with my mom's mother, it was just a different vibe or a feel that I felt more safe in that space. And it really does mess with your mind. So well into my 30s, that's how I felt. Well into my 30s, and it really, I just didn't know where I fit in. And I also got married during this time as well, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So that is my first reflection point. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I'm good. All right, so right when I turned, so first of all, 40s are like the best decade. So I highly recommend it, that you go through it, because it's the best decade. Right? Oh, I hear some woo-woos. That's right. There's a lot of changes that happened in my 40s. So I want to kind of start, here's the reflection point, widening my circle of loving relationships. So now I can talk a little bit about my marriage. I won't focus on it. But I was very comfortable, like people who know me from when I was young, was very affable, funny. I had a lot of friends, but I didn't have like close friends. And then I get married and I'm like, I don't know, like 24, 25. And I was completely okay and comfortable, whatever she wanted to do in the sense of like, well, I want to spend more time with my family. And be like, okay, that's fine. And as we moved across the country, it was like, okay, that's fine. And then I turned 40. And so then I turned 40. And the beginning of the 40s wasn't the best. I tore my ACL, like literally 2 months after I turned 40. But it was also when I started at Pima Community College. And when I started at Pima Community College, now, I think my ex and I, we had a journey that was maybe a shared misery. Like I worked at Disney World, I worked at MGM Grand in Las Vegas. So on the surface, they seemed like really fun jobs, but I didn't feel any connection to my community. And when I got to Pima Community College, which was all by like serendipity, it was like the recession happened, I was a trainer, like nobody's gonna hire a trainer in the middle of a recession. So suddenly I career pivoted and somebody said, oh, I know this guy, met him, he seems pretty nice. Maybe you should hire him for this role at Pima Community College. So the role at Pima Community College was a program called Adelante. It was part of a national, I'm losing the word, part of a national study. So they had like different areas around the country. The focus in Pima Community College was on Latino males. If you don't know this, that subset is the one that is one of the lowest in terms of college completion. So they said, hey, Frank, we need help recruiting people into this program. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And it was a temporary role. Not even 2 weeks after I started, the program manager moved her family to San Antonio. They all looked at me and said, do you want to run this program? I'm like, I kind of think I do. And so I did. And it was so refreshing. I found my space in helping students along their journeys. But more importantly, I started to widen my circle of loving relationships, and I'll explain how. Somebody got wind that I used to be a trainer at the college at HR and said, hey, Frank, do you want to run a book club? They had this idea of running book clubs at each of the 5 or 6 campuses. And I was like, yeah, okay. And mind you, I am not like a book reader. I love to read, but books, it's like, oh, that's not my jam. But I was like, hey, it's an opportunity to meet other people. And so I did. And what it also required was an ability to open up. So we had a book, and there was about 10 of us in our group at the West Campus, and it wasn't about the book anymore. It was really about those relationships. Like, the book was just an avenue to get connected to other people and really communicate. And we would talk about like some serious stuff. Like, I opened up in ways that I hadn't before. Really quick story about my ex-wife. I would say coming to Pima Community College was probably the beginning of the end of our relationship. And it was simply because I found my space, I found my people, I found what I wanted to do, I found similar people who are on that journey. And timing is everything. If I had gotten divorced, I don't know, 5 years earlier, I didn't have that support. Suddenly, because of the book club, which I think we called ourselves the PCC Buccaneers, I had a support group. And they helped. And one person particularly, and I'll give her a shout out later. Well, I'll give her a shout out here, but I'm going to contact her. Teresita was the best. She's a career counselor at the college, and she was my de facto therapist. She really was. So we'd go into her office, and I'd say all the stuff. And I won't go into all the gory details of the ending of that relationship, but it was really difficult. Really difficult. But having that support system as I moved through there was absolutely what I needed at that time. Also, having that support system helped me as I transitioned out of the college. And again, I won't go into all the gory details, but it actually moved me into a space of working at, which again, Anita said, at an organization. All right, so that's reflection point number 2. Well, I should say, well, let me close this when I found my community. So now I'm at and this reflection point, I would say, is the myth of leading with authenticity. You know, we hear a lot about, you know, leadership, and you got to lead with authenticity. The intersections of who I am as a person, particularly as a man of color, I can't always lead with authenticity, and almost it's very hard to. And I say it in this way: there are white spaces everywhere. The country was designed to benefit white folks, white men specifically. I apologize to my white men in here if you didn't know this, but now you know. So in that space, finding myself was really hard. So I actually, you know, I was at that organization for 3 years. I doubled its budget in the 3 years that I was there, and was unceremoniously let go. And so that was very difficult. And having to move through that space of like, oh, and especially speaking of reflections, reflecting on the part where I was like, oh my gosh, in my 3 years that I was there, I was never my authentic self. Was never. It was first time CEO, first time in the nonprofit world. I didn't know. I just was like, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake. And even though I helped increase the budget, as I said, and put JobPath more on the map, created really great relationships with the county and the city, who were our biggest funders, it ended the way it ended. And that was really hard. And so going through that process of just healing through that, recognizing a couple of things. One, your identity should not be wrapped entirely with the job that you're in. It just shouldn't be. And mine was. I was not in a relationship at the time, so I was pouring like 60, 70 hours a week into work, and suddenly and this literally happened like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And again, I won't share all the details, but it was just very hard to move through that space with this uncertainty with the world, with the COVID. But moving through that space was absolutely a challenge, and just really the reflection point of like, okay, what do you want to do next? And what I thought I wanted to do was jump right into another role. Like, oh, I was a CEO of a nonprofit, I got to get another role as a CEO of a nonprofit. Fortunately, I had a time where I think I finished second for one of these positions, but it was probably the best thing. And what I ended up being is just, all right, Frank, maybe this is your opportunity to sit back and just relax, find out what you want to do next, take that opportunity. And so I did. So I worked for 3 different organizations. Contracted work was with the YWCA of Southern Arizona, Boys to Men Tucson, and the Sunnyside Foundation. There's a common thread with those 3 organizations is that they were all focused on racial and gender equity, and that is where my heart is. It's like I want to make sure that we all have the same outcomes for this. So that allowed me really to heal. And I got to give a shout out to Boys to Men Tucson because here we are trying to give young men and young boys, or those who identify as masculine, giving them a space to work through this. You can't help. Well, let me back this up because I don't want to say it this way, because when we're going through our own trauma, don't be in a circle where you're just dumping your trauma, because that's not effective. I don't do that, but what it did was it did allow me to heal, because they also offered like men's spaces. So then I got to talk with men about like the things that I was going through, like the guilt and shame of the end of my marriage, the moving through these spaces in leadership spaces where I didn't feel included, or I certainly felt excluded. Talking to other men was really just refreshing, and it helped me in that healing process. Just want to do a quick look. Oh, I should have said this, but I'm going to say it now. I know I kind of just went over kind of like my challenges as a leader of color in the community, but I kind of want to talk about some specific things, what I mean by that. So as a man of color, you get the microaggressions. So I'll get things that are said like, oh, you're so articulate. And that's just, I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means. Or if I talk with my hands, oh, you're moving your hands too much. Or if I give a dab to a good friend of mine, they don't know what to do with that. Or if I hug, like my friend Maria there, she's great. So it's like, oh, you can't be doing that stuff. So who decides these things? So to me, those are microaggressions. If I have a relationship with Lisa, I'm going to come up and hug her. If I have a relationship with Maria, I'm going to come up and hug her. These are my friends, and who are also in spaces of leadership. And then I hear that noise, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. Now, mind you, I do request. So I want to say that, make that very clear. I don't just come up and hug on somebody. I'm like, well, I don't know how I said it. I think I say like hug or fist bump. And if they say fist bump, then I know exactly where they are. So anyway, so I'm saying those things because I'd often hear these mixed messages about my professionalism, which is a word that I hate, as if that's a reflection on who I am. And like, if you're taking away all these things, who am I now? I'm just a shell of who you think I am as a leader. So I think that's what I wanted to say there. So anyway, so the healing process, that absolutely felt like me. But all of these experiences led to this. So my organization is called For the Hood, but I kind of want to move through the space of what it is or how it started, but then how it shifted. It began, honestly, as a space to bring credibility to the training sessions that I do. You know, when I left that organization that I mentioned earlier, the nonprofit, I was already doing national presentations, and I would use that organization's name. In the interim, after I left, I started to use my personal email address, and I was just like, I need to bring credibility to the work that I'm doing. So that was the origin of why I started my business, which focuses a lot on language, leadership, and some other pieces. So as I started to move through that space, what it ended up becoming, and I think Maria might have been one of the people, I know Lisa was, but this was a little post with Lisa, but certainly with Maria, I'm pretty confident I had this conversation with her. It was the fall of 22. There was a number of folks that I knew in the community of color who were leaders, and I would sit down with them and I said, I have this idea. I said, what if I created a space for people of color where we can, I call this the 3 R's. I probably didn't say it like this to them at that point, but I'll say it to you so I don't have to repeat it twice. I said, what if I created a space for people of color where we can be authentically real with one another, where we can reconnect with other leaders of color in the community, and where we can reclaim every part of who we are as leaders, because that's what makes us who we are. And to a T, every person that fall was like, we don't have that. We don't have that. Yes, I think we should do that. I think you should create this. And again, as I shared with you, these are all based on my own experiences. When I was the CEO, I didn't have a network. When you're in that role of a CEO of a nonprofit, you can't talk to your board, and you can't talk to your staff. So you have to find your people. That's what I needed to do, and I specifically wanted to find my people who look like me. And I did, but I thought, what if we did this proactively? And that's how Ascending Leaders in Color came about. And I've got, I think, 3 cohorts who've completed. Lisa and Jeanette on the end over there are actually ALC alumni. And I have 2 currently going on. One of them is my first ever virtual cohort. So I got people in the Phoenix area, Indiana, I think Washington State and California. And I'm launching some more. What I'm doing for this group, though, as I'm going through this process of learning and leaning into this program, I wanted to create a space for white allies as well. And here's the reason I say it. People of color, we can do the work, but having allies who can support us when it's just too heavy for us as people of color, we need you. We really do need you, and creating a space for them is what I wanted to create as well. And I'll just very briefly talk about what that looks like. So I call the concept learning separately to lead collectively. And this is the part where I'm hoping you'll hold space with me. People automatically think that's segregation. But I'm going to explain why. Learning separately, we are going through different things in our lives. And what I mean is people of color, we come from the lens of being oppressed, never having spaces for ourselves. So being in a space where you can immediately jump in and go, wow, I don't have to wear any filters. And Lisa, again, and I don't mean to point her out, the first meeting that we had for Ascending Leaders in Color for the 3rd cohort, 2 of the folks in there were like, wow, everybody looks like me. And it just, I think one of the circle agreements was cursing is required. So it was. And we need it, because that's, sometimes white folks get a little offended by that. But anyway, so being in a space, immediately 2 of the people were like, I am myself. And you don't know how much of that healing process matters when you're going through this, and it's a 9-month program. It just feels different. For our white folks, and this is what I've been told, but I can I relate in certain respects, meaning around the guilt and the shame. But those are the 2 words that I often hear from white folks, is who are down for the cause, would be like, they carry a guilt and they carry a shame from their parents, their ancestors, family members, relatives, friends, and they carry that shame with them in the space. And so I wanted to provide a space for them to heal too. And what that looks like is that I've identified a really great friend of mine in the community who is a white woman who is a social worker and is familiar with this type of work to facilitate our white folks. So I'm launching the first ever white affinity group, I think in a couple of weeks, or maybe 2 weeks, or maybe a week and a half. It's happening so fast. September's so busy. But anyway, so that's what I wanted to do. And it's the same topics. So microaggressions I mentioned is one, tokenism, colorism, bias of professionalism, effects of assimilation, code switching, which is what I'm kind of doing here. But anyway, so those are the topics. But to have these groups literally going on the same journey together, literally same date, same times, and NISA is going to be part of the first ever White Affinity Group, to go through these topics in separate spaces, but hopefully under the same building, move through it, and then at the end when they come together, to have that conversation. It's like, what did you learn, and how are you going to go forward doing the work that we need to do, particularly, and I know we have a mix of people here, but again, white spaces are everywhere. How can we come together to work in a way that moves the Tucson community in the way that we want it to move? So that's would be my 5th reflection, I think. All right, so I think I have one more. Oh no, this is the 5th reflection. All right, so the 5th reflection is leaning into my authenticity. So that framing, well, this is me in Nashville a couple of weeks ago. It was so cool. Country Music Hall of Fame was where they had it. It was amazing. Anyway, so the 5th reflection is this. So this whole framing I did at the beginning, it brings you all into my world. So if I can just share that with you, then it changes the temperature of the room in the sense of like, hey, here's who you're getting. This is my authentic self. I feel that if I say these points, it just changes the dynamic of the presentation. I really do firmly believe that. Has it been perfect in my life? Nope. Have I lost some friends? Likely. But what I am doing is I'm finding my people. And I love that. I'll relate this. It's not in my notes, but I think about this because, you know when you have those feelings of like, well, let me put it this way. I'll just say it this way. So I have this email list. So I have For the Hood. Create this email list. You get excited, but every email you send out, you get a few unsubscribes. And then you're like, oh, why are they unsubscribing? And I used to take, like I'd be like really hurt. So don't you unsubscribe. Don't you unsubscribe. Don't unsubscribe, please. You're going to hurt my feelings. So I say that because what it's actually doing, it's calling out the people who don't want to hear your message. And then you get to build on the people who do. And so that's how I see, like, I'm going to lose some friends. I mean, I can talk about the organization I led. I can talk about Pima College. Like, I lost some friends, but what I gained were people who really see me as who I am. All my faults, all my good pieces of who I am. And that's what matters most. And so, as I said, lost some along the way, but who I've gained or what I've gained during that is way better. All right, and so, oh, this is funny. This is my joke now. All right, I think I'm pretty much done, but it's going to say I wouldn't be a solopreneur if I didn't say I want you on my email list. All right, so I got all of these little swag, but if you just go to forthehood.com, which is 4dahood.com, it'll pop. Two things will happen. One, like a little pop-up window will show up and says, hey, if you want to learn about acid-based language, a free document, then you can sign up that way. Or if you just scroll down to the homepage, you'll see it right there to subscribe. So I'm hoping that I get you on my list. If you feel you want to be part of my crew, if you want to be like, here's my crew right here. I love y'all right here. Right too. Y'all are part of my crew. I want you to be a part of my crew. So if you want, that's what I would say. But thank you so much for your time. I think I'm done. Thank you. He has a really good backstory, and he really tries to keep the shoes inexpensive, blah, blah, blah this, blah, blah that. So anyway, so I bought the shoes, on Amazon. So when I got the shoes, the box was an orange box, and it had a skull on it. And so my brain was like, I thought Dia de los Muertos, because it just looked like that. So then I opened it, and then there was like mariposa, so like butterflies within the box, like artwork. And I was like, what is this? And then I pull out the shoe, and then on the side of the shoe where typically it has his name, Mitchell, it said Dia de los Muertos. So on the side of each shoe, and I was like, ah! And so then they have a white spot on the front, I'll step back, where you can leave, as if it was an ofrenda, you can leave a message to honor whoever you want to honor. And so Maria and Anita, which are the names of my grandmothers, are on each of the shoes. So great, thanks for reminding me about that. So yeah. So I knew if I was talking about my grandmothers, I had to wear the shoes. Thank you.
We love a good grandma name as a fellow Anita. Which also was my grandmother's name. Any other questions for Frank? I know y'all got him.
Yes, Peter.
So you were talking about microaggressions, and it sounds like it's fairly common that there's some microaggressions, which being white, the white privilege thing I'm very aware of. Microaggressions are kind of surprising to me because, I don't see that.
Right.
How prevalent is that? I mean, is it like a subset of us that does that, or is it like pretty much across the board and we're just totally unaware of it? Or,
Well, I appreciate the question, and honestly, it runs the gamut. But a microaggression, the way that, and I don't have the specific definition, but basically it's sometimes it's not seen, and it's for the person giving the microaggression, they don't know. But that's not always the case, because some do know. And so it's pretty much left to us to kind of figure out all that stuff, which again is unfair. But yeah, microaggressions, it really does run the gamut of like intent, intentionality. I'll give you a really good story, and I won't use her name, but it was somebody who was in my program where she didn't even know, she's a Mexican woman, a young lady, I think she's in her 20s, and so she started to, we gave her this session topic. She didn't have a name to what it was, but when she read the topic and then we met as a group, like she cried because she was like, this happens in my workplace. And she gave two examples. One was like she works in like cubicles, you know, so you have the cutoffs. And somebody said something about, oh, you need to stay on your side of the wall. And she didn't know that that was, so that would be an intentional microaggression. It's like, oh, I'm just joking. And some of the other ones that are unintended, as I mentioned, would be like, you know, oh, you speak so articulate. I've had that a lot, and it's like, and it's just hard and heavy. And here's the other thing, Peter, and again, any person of color in here who wants to jump in as well, please jump in. But the other piece is over time, and not just over time, but the 99 people who meant it, when you get to that 100th person who didn't mean it, that's like the 100th cut. And so then I might respond in a way that's not appropriate, but it's being cut and cut and cut, and then that's the byproduct of it, is then, you know, even if that 100th person didn't mean it, I've already had 99 cuts. And so like that's another thing that we have to go through as people of color, is really just kind of figure that how do we protect ourselves, and how do we find other folks who've gone through it so that we can help manage through this, and then educate. You know, so the other thing, you know, Peter, is I would just look it up. Look up microaggressions. There's a lot of great articles around it, and then just kind of see how that plays out in the workplace. I appreciate that. Thank you for that question, Peter. And any person of color who, if I miss something, please jump in.
Well, I would just say it's not limited to like white folks versus folks of color. Like we
It's
do
true.
it to ourselves. It's so fun. Like there's, I mean, because it comes down to power and control, and like how you feel more powerful is in relation to oppressing someone else. And so it's within our communities, it's colorism of like how close is your skin to white, and that equals more power and like access, and it's within our families of origin around so much. So I would say it is, especially in places of in places of work. It's like that extra piece where it's like we already know we've got to armor up, and we're just like, wait, but also in our families, and so it is. I would 100% echo that. It's so important to have your people where like you can get together and just like lift each other up and like hold each other after that.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would add to what Maria just said is the intersection of gender. You know, so you're a person of color and you're a woman of color, you're getting multiple. And even if you're not a person of color and you're a woman, you're getting some of those microaggressions as well, especially around dress and what you wear as a woman. Very sexist. And so, and often they'll be bombarded with those microaggressions as well. So it's not just race, usually leads with race, but certainly the intersections of gender, sexual orientation, those all come into play as well. Yes, and what's the first name?
Desiree.
Hi, Desiree. Are we connected on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And you're in GTL.
Yes.
See?
So I grew up in Idaho, which is highly racist, and so I had, you know, I could talk about this subject forever, but it's interesting with my family watching them, so my maiden name is Lopez, and watching my uncles and how they all handled racism in Idaho. There's like one uncle who's just completely in denial. He just pretends he's white. It's quite hilarious. And then there's, you know, another uncle that really recognizes, you know, I'm a person of color. You're treating me unfairly. This is not right. And then I feel like my dad, who was kind of just in this like kind of please everyone happy middle ground. And it's not until my dad got out of Idaho that he actually started to realize how oppressive it was. And when he goes back now and just walking into a restaurant, he notices the microaggressions, like, you know, like the white people is watching him to sit down,
Yep.
like checking him out. Is he
The gays.
Is he okay? Is he safe? He's like, I'm from Idaho. My grandparents are from Idaho. My great-grandparents are from Idaho. But they're watching him. Oh, are you going to make sure you pay for that bill? It's like, well, yeah, I'm going to pay for the bill.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took him being removed from a situation to realize it.
Yeah. Thank you, Desiree. Jeanette.
How, I follow you on LinkedIn, and we're fairly close. And it's important to me personally when people walk their talk. And I've seen you do that a lot. And it has, like, how does that feel to with your peers and colleagues? How do you get yourself through that?
Wisdom helps. Age probably helps a little bit too. The older you get, you don't give as much of a fuck. Pardon me. But to your point, I'll even share a moment that happened while we were talking. I'm being recorded, and I didn't want to say the name of that organization, and I did, meaning the one where we separated. So even there's a lens of like, oh, should I have said that? And it's like, well, hopefully you can edit it out. But yeah, it's hard. It's a journey, and I'm grateful. So I have a day job. So at that day job, the two leaders there, well, let me just say the top, because that's where it matters. I've had some heart-to-heart conversations with him about how I'm feeling moving in that space. It's a space that is a very white space, and a couple of incidents have happened. One even recently happened, and trying to maneuver through that. If I didn't have support or a level of support from him, it would be I don't think I'd be there. Honestly, I don't. And I hear a lot of people who are of color, because of the space that I'm in, deals a lot around workforce development. They'll tell me, we need you there. And it's like, oh, because you have the lens for the issues on this topic. And it's hard. And so to your question, I think what I do is and every person of color does this, we all know this. If we go into a space like this, we do the quick scan, like, all right, how many people of color are in here? How many white folks? And if there's a great deal of white folks, I'm probably not going to say a lot of stuff. And especially if I'm wearing the lens of my day job. Where I find authenticity is this. This is me. I'm here representing For the Hood. I'm here representing my business. That gives me a sense of authenticity that I wouldn't have if I didn't have that. And that's helpful. And the other little trick that I do with LinkedIn is that I only talk about For the Hood on LinkedIn. I'll get tagged for my day job, but I never post anything about my day job, because on LinkedIn, this is Frank from For the Hood. And so those are things that help me stay authentic in that space, but it's not always easy. It's not. So it's always like I said, I had that moment in here as soon as I said the name of the nonprofit, I was like, oh, it's like I probably shouldn't have said that. But and that's maybe an internal fear. Maybe at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But certainly, it's still a lens that I look through.